All right, guys, welcome back to part 4 of Septemics, going over all the different levels and scales with Jim Marshall. Jim, you want to introduce yourself real quick before we get into part 4?
Sure. I'm the the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published it in the book Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Today, we're going to discuss some of the content of that book, so I can give you some specifics about how to use it and how you can benefit from it.
Fantastic. While I pull this up, since reading this book and how we're going over all these scales, I just keep seeing it over and over and over again, some of these scales that we've gone over. Oh. Can you see it on the screen?
We're beginning today with the scale of conflict. Good. So I just wanted to clarify your comment. When you say seeing it, are you saying that you are observing the septemic phenomena in life?
Yes, not only in myself, but in other people I see.
Right.
Like the different levels that they're on of the scales that we've gone over.
Yes, it's all right there for anybody to use. I just wrote it down and got it out so that everybody can benefit from this data in the same way that they benefit from the periodic table. It's just factual information that is naturally occurring, and anybody who studies it will benefit from it. So we're ready to talk about the scale of conflict. Okay, so this is a spiral scale, which means there is an apparent congruency between level 1 and level 7. Level 1 is no conflict, and level 7 is also no conflict. But on level 7, it's no conflict possible. And on level 1, it's no need for conflict. So you want to make sure you don't confuse this. Just because a person has no conflict doesn't tell you whether it's 1 or 7. If a person is at peace, that's level 1. If a person is in denial, that's level 7. This is a gradual scale, meaning there are intervening levels. It goes gradually from the bottom to the top. It doesn't jump abruptly from level to level, as some scales do. And it's a specific scale, meaning it relates to a context. What about the conflict between you and your wife? The conflict between you and your boss? The conflict between your son and his sister? So it doesn't have a general application, it's a specific scale. Now let's talk about the axis that's on the right. The vertical dotted line goes from at the top, complete responsibility, to at the bottom, no responsibility. Now, complete responsibility is another way of saying cause. When you assume complete responsibility, you are at cause. When you assume no responsibility, you are at effect. So this runs from cause at the top to effect at the bottom. So obviously you don't want to be at effect. You want to be at cause in any context. Okay, So let's talk about level 7, no conflict possible. So this person is in denial. He is denying the existence of the conflict. So this person is in a conflict and is ignoring it to a point where he says it doesn't exist. So no conflict is possible because he's denying it. In order for the person to experience conflict, he has to admit that there is a conflict. Now, the person at 7 is not free of conflict. He's totally overwhelmed by conflict, so he just denies it. He says, no, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say, well, isn't that daffy? Yes, it's daffy. Up from that is level 6, which is defeated. This is a person who has been in a conflict and he is defeated, which is another way of saying dominated, okay? He has lost. 5 above that is losing. So this person is struggling. He hasn't been defeated yet, but he's struggling with it. Level 4 is stalemate, which is a point of equilibrium where neither side can really get anywhere. And level 3 is winning. Winning is success. That's what winning means, being a success in whatever context this is. And level 2 is victorious. So you have already won. That's dominance. And when I say dominance there, I don't mean being a bully. I just mean dominant the way the Beatles were dominant in the pop music world in the 60s. They were clearly the dominant act.
Mm-hmm.
The Beatles have sold over 1 billion units of product. Nobody has ever come, excuse me, not 1 billion, 1 million. I misspoke. The Beatles have sold over 1 million units of product. Nobody has ever become close to that. They were victorious. For example, if you take a band that was very successful like Journey, Journey was a superstar band in the 80s, okay? They sold about 25 million records. That gives you a frame of reference to the Beatles. Did I misspeak again? I'm getting my billions and my millions mixed up today.
No,
yes, the Beatles have sold over 1 billion units, as compared to Journey, who was a very big band, sold 25 million. Now, 25 million is a lot. Most groups don't get there. So that's what I mean by dominance. And a level 1 is no need for conflict. This is a person who's at peace. He doesn't have any need for conflict. This is a person who is above the fray. Now, again, as I've said before, most people are going to have difficulty understanding the extremes of all of the scales, because at the top, it gets into states that most people never experience. And at the bottom, it also gets into states most people don't experience. So most of us live in the middle of all of the scales. So when a person is truly at peace, he has no need for conflict. So you take somebody like one of the great Hindu yogis, okay? They're at peace. They have no need for conflict. They have no interest in conflict. They're just not going to be in conflict about anything. And that's because they assume complete responsibility, which puts them in a causal state. Any questions?
And this is just pertains to, it's not just one thing, it's in all different areas, correct?
Yes, it's a specific scale, which means that context is necessary. You have to have a context to make this determination. There's no general level for anyone because it's a specific scale.
Right. So no, level 1, no need would be like no attachments to anything, like no attachments to an outcome, because there's just no need.
Right. In that context.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, like you could have a guy who's in this spectacular romantic relationship with a woman, right?
Yeah.
There's no need for conflict. They get along great. they're at peace with one another. You see? And that's because they are both assuming complete responsibility for one another.
Mm.
When you assume complete responsibility, there is no conflict. Conflict is the result of a shirking of responsibility.
Mm.
Let's say you're at level 2, right? Victorious,
Mm-hmm.
as was the case for the United States in 1945. Although this is a specific scale, we can discuss it in, although this is an individual scale, we can discuss it hypothetically in a group context. So the United States was victorious. They were the dominant nation in the world at that time. So they were not assuming complete responsibility for the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese and the fascist Italians. You know, they had a denazification program where they sent people into Germany to hunt down all the Nazis and get them out of the government. See, so they were not assuming responsibility for these people. They wanted to get rid of them. See? Now, that's a good state to be in, but it's not the same as peace.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Makes
Shall we
sense.
go on?
Yep.
Okay, the scale of reaction. Now,
Mm.
let me define reaction. If you step on my toe and I say, ouch, it's a reaction. Now, most people, when they get in trouble, it's because they react.
Mm.
So let's say you're in a bar and the guy says, your mother's ugly. Her face looks like a camel. And the other guy says, oh, yeah, and punches him in the nose. That's a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if somebody said that to me, I'd say, well, okay, that's your opinion. You're entitled to. See, that's not a reaction. It's a response. Responsibility is the ability to respond. So a person who is responsible does not react. To the degree that someone reacts, he's not being responsible. So this is an extremely important scale. You need to know where you are. And everybody enters the scale at level 1 and proceeds down. And the bottom of it is 7, which is acting out, which is a form of insanity. Now, this is a linear scale, meaning there's no apparent congruence between levels 1 and 7. Quantum, meaning you leap instantaneously from one level to the next. There's no intervening state. There's no gradation. And it's specific, meaning it has a context. So are you reacting in your relationship with your son? Are you reacting in your relationship with your wife? Are you reacting in your relationship with your boss? You see? Mm-hmm. You're going to have different levels for different contexts. And this is extremely useful to analyze what's going on. Because if you can spot where you are, that opens the way to move yourself up to a higher level, which is always what you want in any context. So let's look at the vertical dotted line on the right. Okay, so this goes from least affected to most affected. Now, when something affects you, then you react to it. You see, I gave you a context before where somebody insults your mother. If somebody did that to me, that would not affect me. So I wouldn't be irritated. You see, I would simply laugh at it or whatever. You see, so as soon as you're on the scale, you are already somewhat affected by that context. So how affected are you? Are you affected to the point where it bothers you, which is level 1? Or are you affected more to it to the point where you're protesting? See, like somebody could say something insulting to you, that might bother you, that's level 1, but you might not say anything about it, right? Mm-hmm. It bothers you, so it has an effect on you, but you don't do anything about it. You don't make an ugly face, you don't sneer, right? You keep it, whatever reaction you have, you keep to yourself. Okay? But when you come to two, you're protesting. You're saying, wait a minute, don't talk to me about my mother. Who are you? You should never insult somebody's mother. So you're being critical. When you're protesting, you're criticizing. That's what protest is.
Hmm.
Okay? Now that's still not so bad. But if you get more affected, then you start to worry about it. And that's where anxiety comes from. Anxiety is the result of being worried about something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you've gone merely protesting it to where it's worrying you. It's like a persistent state. Like if a guy is being audited by the IRS, right? He's worried. He has anxiety. He's anxious about it. You see, it has affected him.
Hmm.
Now, beyond that, the next step down is where you start to rationalize,
Hmm.
meaning you justify it. So now you're sort of making up what you might call a cheap rationalization about it. So let's say you're worried about your wife two-timing you with some other guy, right? You have some anxiety on that. But when you go down to 4, now you start justifying it. You start saying something like, well, she's not a trustworthy person anyway.
Hmm.
You see, you're rationalizing it. That's worse. Rationalizing is worse than simply being worried about it. Now, if you are more affected, you go down to being upset. That's where a person is upset. He's angry. Okay, he has an emotional trauma. He's shocked by this. This affects him to a point where he's shocked by it. Like you come home and you find your wife has been murdered and she's on the living room floor bleeding out, right? So that's upsetting. It's shocking, right? It affects you. Okay, so worse than that is the next one down is shocked. Now, there's a little, what shall I say? A little ambiguity or confusion here because the word shock comes in both levels because I didn't really know what other word to use. Beyond upset, see, upset is like a guy is ranting and raving and yelling, okay? Something shocked him and so he's upset. Like he's yelling at you, he's threatening you, that's upset. Shocked is a person who's stunned. In other words, he can't talk. He can't answer your questions. You know, he turns pale. You see, that's stunned. Now, stunned and shock are synonyms. So I don't want you to get confused. When I was looking for a synonym for upset, well, the best word I could think to really explain it is shocked. But that's not shocked in the same sense as stunned, right? When you are stunned by something, you are at level 6. So you get some news that's so horrible, it shocks you. You can't respond. This is the person who's not even able to cry about it. You know, you tell somebody, the policeman comes and says, we have to tell you that your son was killed in an automobile accident. Person is stunned. He doesn't know what to say. You know? So below that is acting out. Now, acting out is dramatizing. In other words, you are literally acting something out. So you're not simply stunned where you're kind of in a state of inability to do anything. Now you are compulsively acting out something. So this is crazy people, like people who, you know, when you see people rioting or people lynching people, they are acting out. So they are so affected by it that they're crazy.
Hmm.
So that's what this scale is about. It's important to not react. The Chinese have an ancient custom called Wu Wei. Wu Wei means, in Chinese, means no action or non-action. I prefer to define it as no reaction, because in human behavior, that's actually how it manifests.
Mm.
So I am a practitioner of Wu Wei. I'm in a more or less permanent state of not reacting to anything.
Mm.
This is a very good place to be. I'm pretty sure, if I recall correctly, this is a Taoist concept. So if you don't react at all, you can practice Wu Wei and nothing bothers you. You see, you're not bothered, which is level one, because you're above it. You're not on the scale.
Mm.
You are above the scale.
Mm. Interesting.
I'll give you an example. I have a cousin who was murdered a few years ago. He went to a public gathering, and some nut with a high-powered rifle fired. He had the guy had some gripe against City Hall or something. He fired. The bullet went, a high-powered rifle. Bullet went right through the wall into my cousin and killed him. Okay, so I did not react to this. I was probably the only person in the family who did not react. Now, of course, everybody else in the family had something on this scale. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't, because I practiced Wu Wei. I just understood that he was ready to leave this plane of existence, and he put himself in the exact position where that bullet would be, and that was the end.
Mm.
So I was not upset. I was not rationalizing. I was not worried. I was not protesting. I wasn't irritated. I just saw the thing. I had a response to it. He was a wonderful person. I loved him. I cherished all our memories together, but I did not react. So the whole idea of cognitive therapy is that you always has a choice how you react to something.
Mm.
So when somebody hits you with a stimulus, you can either not react at all, or if, like most people, you do react, it's somewhere on this scale.
Mm. Now,
Any
what about
questions?
yeah, what about sadness?
Well, sadness generally comes when a person has been upset by something for a while, he will then become sad about it. He does not become sad immediately. First comes the upset. So remember, this is a linear scale.
Mm.
So the sadness appears after level 5, and it probably carries down into level 6, somewhere in there. But sadness is a specific emotion. You have to realize that my job was to articulate these levels precisely. And sadness does not really fit as one of the levels, although sadness is something that's going to happen between 5 and 6.
Gotcha. Okay.
See, often a person who's shocked, he's not even sad yet. He's so stunned, he's not even sad. That's why it's quite common that it'll hit the person later on. You know, after the police leaves, the mother sits down and cries for 3 hours. See, when they were there, she was so stunned, she couldn't even do that.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay,
Yep, I got it.
next. Okay, the group scales. We're finally getting to the group scales. Now, these are scales which apply to groups rather than to individuals. Okay, let's see the first one. The scale of relationships. In order to have a relationship, you have to have at least 2 people. You could have more than 2 people in a relationship, but you can't have only one, because there's nothing to relate to. You have to have at least 2 people. So this is a group scale. Now, this is a spiral scale. There is an apparent congruence between level 1 and level 7. A person who is obsessed is fixated on something, and that very often looks very much like a person who is in a state of unity with somebody.
Mm.
Now, the difference is obsession is a mental illness. The person is fixated on somebody. That is not a good thing. You know, like some crazy guy, and he's got pictures of this particular woman all over his apartment. You know, he's fixated on her.
Mm.
As opposed to unity, that doesn't happen in unity. Unity is a state of duplication, where you duplicate the person. And very often, you'll get empathy and telepathy manifesting at that level, where the relationship is so good that you don't have to say anything. So the person can just pick it up.
Mm.
Now, let's look at, this is a gradual scale, meaning you have intervening levels. You go gradually from level 3 to level 2. And if you think about relationships, that's how it is. You don't go instantly from friendship to harmony. There's an intervening state there. And this is a general scale, meaning once you find it, that's it. So let's say you want to analyze your relationship with your significant other, right? You have some kind of a relationship, good or bad, and you can find where it is on this scale. And the beauty of that is once you get it, you then can move the relationship up to the next higher level. And you will be able to do that because that is the axiomatic pattern of all of these scales. If you know the right level, you can move up to the next level. Generally, there are a few scales where some scales are harder to move on than others. And some situations, some people are more intransigent than others.
Mm.
Now let's look at the axis on the right, the vertical dotted line. So at the top, we have zero distance and complete understanding. So when you have complete understanding of the other person, the distance between you is zero. In other words, you're so close, there is no distance. That's why you have unity. You're not two, you're one. Doesn't happen too much. Most people have no personal reality on this state, but it does occur. Now at the bottom, you have infinite distance and no understanding. So when you don't understand something at all, your distance is infinite. In other words, there's this crazy guy who is obsessed with this woman, right? He's fixated on her. There's no understanding. He doesn't understand why he's doing that. He doesn't understand really who she is. He doesn't understand anything about this. The distance between them is infinite. Now you can say, well, isn't that crazy? Yes, that's crazy. So up from level 7 is level 6, which is enmity, which is hatred. We all understand this. When you hate someone, your relationship is one of hatred. Like when you have a husband and wife in divorce court, and they're both fighting one another with their lawyers, okay? There's hatred there. So that's not as crazy as obsession. It's actually a little bit saner. That's not obvious at all. Then up from that is you have disassociation. Disassociation means dislike. So when you dislike somebody, what do? You disassociate from them. Like when the couple separates, right? The married couple separates, they disassociate from one another because they dislike one another. They haven't gotten to hatred yet, probably. So that's where the breakup occurs at level 5. Level 4 is association. Now, association is neutral. You associate with somebody. So let's say you are in the supermarket, right? And you're buying your groceries, and the checkout lady is there. You have a slight relationship with her. The relationship is that she scans your groceries, she tells you how much money it is, you know. She might say hello. Okay, that's neutral. It's really not positive or negative. Okay, it's a relationship of neutrality. Now, up to level 3, beyond association, is friendship. When you improve from neutrality, you go into like. So let's say you sit next to some guy at a football game. You don't know this guy, right? You're at association. You're neutral. But you start talking to him, and by the end of the game, you like the guy. So there's like a little bit of a friendship there. Above that is harmony. This is what we call love. Love is harmony. When two people love one another, they are in harmony. They're different. See, the idea of harmony, like when you sing in harmony, two people are singing two different notes, but it's good, it's pleasant. That's what love is about. Two people, they're different, they're separate. There's not zero distance. There's a lot of understanding. That's what love is. That's a workable definition of love. If you're not in harmony, you're not in love. Then you go up from there to unity, to the state that is not real to most people, and that is the state of duplication. So duplication kind of implies telepathy. You can, you can just send the idea to your beloved wife. I'd like a cup of tea. You don't say anything. She gets it and she makes you a cup of tea. See, that's unity. Because when something is duplicated, it's unity. That's what it is. You're not two different terminals again. You're one terminal. And again, most people will never experience that. And look at level 4, there's that horizontal line, which is the separation between sanity and insanity. Someone whose level is 3, 2, or 1 is sane in this relationship, more so as you go up. Someone who's level 5, 6, or 7 is insane. You might say the relationship is an insane relationship, more so as you go down. So 4 is a state of neutrality. It's not sane, it's not insane. Any questions?
Yeah. One is, I think you can separate that cliche, correct me if I'm wrong, that love and hate are almost the same, which clearly I'm looking at this scale, it doesn't look like it's clearly the same, almost a fine line. I don't think so.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you. What are you trying to say?
So you've heard the expression, love and hate are the same, or almost.
They obviously aren't.
Right.
I never said that.
No, I didn't say you did.
Yeah, I just in general, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
I think it's dopey.
Right. Because I know it's very popular. It's very popular among like relationship coaches that I've heard so many times. But I'm looking at the scale, and it's like how could two things be remotely like even close?
Right. Level 2 is love, and level 6 is hatred.
Mm-hmm. Now, and if you were in a relationship with somebody and you just don't like them because you don't like their character or they've done something, that immediately puts you under the insane category, level 5.
Yes, because you see, if you're in a relationship and you disassociate from somebody, that's beginning to take on some insanity, because being in a relationship with somebody that you dislike doesn't make any sense. See, I worked with several different clients who, as a result of working with me, they made tremendous gains and they went home and left their relationship. They came to realize it's a bad relationship. It's a dysfunctional relationship. I don't need this. I'm getting a divorce. I did not suggest any such thing. I would never do that to anyone in any context.
Right.
But that has happened several times. the person came up to a point where he realized that the dislike that the person has for the other person is dysfunctional. And
right,
so you should just get out of that relationship.
right. I
Yeah,
understand, but
yeah.
you get out of the relationship. Does that still make you insane that you don't like that person?
Well, look, you could argue that any type of negativity is getting into the area of insanity. You see, if you pay close attention to uh, the great gurus like Yogananda, for example, or Maharishi Mahashogi, these people are in a state of love.
Mm,
See, they don't really dislike anybody. So they are very sane people.
mm,
So, yes, I would say that, for example, there's like some millions and millions of people in America, like 100 million people who hate Donald Trump. Okay. So they're at level 6, hatred.
right.
Is that a good place to be?
No,
No. So, my position is that I just don't hate people, period. How is that beneficial? How is that useful?
right,
What is the point? Like, I can look at somebody who's bad, at some, criminal, a professional criminal, like people who traffic in children, they're really bad people, but I don't hate them. I want them apprehended for the sake of the children, but that
right.
doesn't mean I hate them. I don't even bother to dislike them. It's just I see what it is, and that's why we have law enforcement.
Mm, mm, gotcha. Yeah, I can see. Now how it can make you insane because if you're still like just the idea of just wrapped up instead of just accepting it and just,
Right.
you know that it is that person is who they are. Like
That's
you
right.
don't have to have any emotional attachment to anything. Just let them be.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's just like, hating anybody, like hating Adolf Hitler. Was Hitler a bad person? Yes, he was a bad person. He was a psychopathic mass murderer. But I don't hate him. What purpose would that serve?
Mm, yeah,
I don't want to walk around full of hate. That doesn't help anything. That ruins your day.
yeah, yeah, it does.
So, and again, look at the top is complete understanding, the bottom is no understanding. The more you understand, the less you're going to be in these lower levels.
Mm. And this really can this work? This can work for your kids as well.
Sure, that's right. You have a relationship with your son or your daughter, and
Hmm.
it's somewhere on this scale.
Gotcha.
Okay, the scale of life spheres. Now, this is something that people are not going to understand initially because the term life spheres I had to create to describe this phenomenon. So here's what I mean by life spheres. Life has different strata, and they exist in a scale. Um, at the bottom, the introversion sphere, that's a nihilistic person. This person is in bad shape. But this person doesn't even embrace himself. That's what nihilism is. It's like a it's like a permanent, persistent state of hating or rejecting everything. So the person at level 6 is introverted. This is the person who's saying, is there something wrong with me? Maybe I need psychiatric drugs. He's introverted. He's not focusing out on the world like a healthy person. Okay. So that person has very little space. His space is tiny. He's not even himself. And again, many people will not understand this. How could this be? So this person's challenge would be to succeed as an individual. He's not even succeeding as an individual. You see? Now, up from that is what I call egocentric. Most people understand this. The egocentric person, this is the individual sphere. This person embraces only himself. That's what an egocentric person does. He doesn't embrace anybody else. He's only embracing himself. So the challenge for this person is not to succeed as an individual. He can do that because he's in the individual sphere. His challenge is to succeed in personal relationships. A person at level 6 cannot have successful personal relationships. He can't get along with his wife or his mother or whatever. He's an alienated person. He can only embrace himself. Now, you see how the person has more space there. He at least includes himself. Up from that is the interpersonal sphere. I call this family centric. Now, this is a person who can embrace close persons. He can embrace his wife, his kids, his mother, or his best friend. You see, that's it. He cannot embrace any more than that. So this person's challenge would be to succeed with a team. This person cannot succeed with a team. He can only succeed with the interpersonal sphere. But you have to realize this person is doing much better than the person at 6. At 6, he's individuated. He's only out for himself. At 5, he has some kind of a family. Now, the family could just be the boyfriend or the girlfriend, you see, but still, it's a family to him. Now, up from that, level 4 is the team sphere. I call this group centric. Now, this person can embrace the team members. So you have to realize these are concentric spheres. So the person at level 4 also has an interpersonal sphere, an individual sphere, introvert. That's all in there. But he has expanded his space to include the team members. So let's say a guy's on the football team, right? All of the members of that team are his friends, which is normal in a sports team. And so the challenge for him is to succeed as a culture. That's too big for him. You see, a culture is too big for him. He can only deal with a team. Now you go up into the cultural sphere. This is what I call ethnocentric. This is a person who can only embrace the cultural members. For example, you have some Jewish people who are extremely stuck in the Jewish culture. If you're, let's say, you are a Hasidic Jew, right? And your wife is a Hasidic Jew, your best friend's a Hasidic Jew, you are ethnocentric. This person cannot succeed as humanity. It's too big for this person. See, this person can have a team, can have a family, can help himself, can even be introverted. So you see, these are concentric spheres. Now let's go up to level 2. This is the human sphere. I call this anthropocentric. Now this person is including all of humanity. So here you find many of the saints. You know, they're not alienated from other people as long as they're humans. Like St. Francis of Assisi, who founded the Franciscan order. You know, he was kind and embracing to all humans. Now, this person cannot embrace all of life. That's still beyond his grasp. So let's go up to level 1, the life sphere. This is life-centric. This person embraces all life forms. Now, this person's challenge would be to transcend life. Now realize that this book is about human phenomena. So once you transcend life, you're not in human phenomena anymore. You're in parapsychological phenomena, spiritual phenomena. So a person at the life sphere, he embraces all living things. Okay, this is a person who would not want to hurt an animal or even a plant or an insect. This person's challenge would be to transcend life. And once you transcend life, you're off the scale because this is the scale of life spheres. So you have to realize when you're at level 7, you're a point. A point is a location that has no size, right? Geometrically. A point has no dimension. So that's why this person can't even embrace himself. So you expand from there in a quantum leap out to the individual sphere. Now you can embrace yourself. Then if you expand from there, you go into the interpersonal sphere. You can embrace your family. So you see, the further up the scale, the better off you are. Further down, the worse off you are, because your sphere is smaller. So the higher you get to the scale, on the scale, the fewer people you find that are in that sphere. There are not that many people who can really embrace all of life. You know, that's like the person who can have affinity for rattlesnakes, for barracuda, for tarantulas, for amoeba. You know, that's a very, very high state. Not many people get there.
Mm.
You know, it was said of Francis of Assisi that he was able to communicate with animals. Animals loved him and they would come around him, and somehow he had some kind of telepathy with animals. I mean, it's hard to know from hundreds of years ago really what it was, but has been widely observed and recorded that he had some special love of everything living. So this is the type of person who would not pick a flower because he doesn't want to hurt the flower. He wants the flower to live in its natural state. See, that's a very high level to be at. So when you see somebody who's not one of these lower levels, stay away from them because he's dangerous. This person is not going to include you in his space. You see, he's not going to be responsible for you. A person at a given level can pretty much get away in his own mind with doing anything to people above it.
Hmm.
So this is, you know, let's say you're on a sports team, right? And you have somebody who's not a team player. He only cares about himself. You know, he only cares about his own statistics and his own glory. He's not a team player. He's not up to level 4. See, he can't embrace the team. He can only embrace his family. He can go home and embrace his wife, but he can't embrace the team. So this is not a good thing to have. There are people like this, and you know, the teams tend to get rid of them. I'll give you a famous example. There was a baseball player, I don't want to mention his name, many years ago, and he was one of the best players in the world, one of the, you know, on the short list for the best player. But there was definitely something wrong with him. And so eventually the team got rid of him. He was just a detriment to the team.
Mm-hmm.
And they got rid of him, even though he was a great player. Still, he screwed up the team. So, you know, if you have a team, whether it's a military unit, a police unit, whatever the team is, you want cohesion in the team. And if somebody isn't a team player, it means he's not up to level 4. This is what you find in criminals. Criminals are at or near the bottom of this scale. It's like a cliche to say that a criminal is only out for himself. So because of that, you get in his way, he'll shoot you. He's not embracing you, he'll just shoot. You know, he points a gun, he says, give me the money in the safe. You hesitate, he shoots you. So that's because he's either at level 6 or level 7. Usually somebody who's at level 6 is what you might call a psychiatric case. Because any type of mental illness is both the cause and the effect of introversion. A crazy person is introverted. You know, he's not extroverted enough to include these other 6 levels in his space. See, an upscale person embraces these things. So this tells you how to select a person. Let's say you have somebody who, he doesn't embrace all life forms. That's not a good person to have at an animal shelter.
Right. Right. Now, once you're on the scale, on one of these scales, it's very hard to move up to the different scale, to a higher scale.
You mean a higher level?
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say that, no. I mean, generally what happens to normal people is, think about an infant. An infant is in the introversion sphere. His challenge is to succeed as an individual. He can't walk, he can't feed himself, he can't speak, right? So when he matures a little bit, he comes up to the individual sphere. And children are notoriously selfish. They're at level 6. See, that person has to learn how to succeed in personal relationships. So if he matures normally, he does. After a while, he gets a sense of the family, and now he can embrace everybody in that family. He's not ready to embrace people outside the family, but he can embrace them. Then, if he develops normally, he can expands himself to include the team, the soccer team, the dance troupe, whatever it is, his class, he includes them. See, this is normal development. So then if he goes beyond that, he can embrace the whole culture. This would be a person who in America, becomes like patriotic, becomes a lover of America, and he can embrace all Americans. We're all Americans, that type of thing. See, so people do move up and they also move down. If you see a guy who has something really bad happen to him, it'll knock him down a level. You can have a guy who has interpersonal relationships, and then he has something really bad happen to him and he loses that. He goes down to a point where he's individuated. He can only embrace himself. He can't love another person because of the trauma he experienced. So people go up these scales and go down these scales.
And all the way to the right, the challenge.
Yes.
That's once you have succeeded at that, that's how you get to the next level, or the next level.
I'm not sure that really applies, but what it does tell you is what's hard for this person.
Right.
You see, so you could have a person who's close to his family, but he's not a team player. He doesn't want to be in a military. He doesn't want to be part of a team. He just wants to stay with his family. Obviously, the more you expand to include these larger spheres, and remember, these are concentric spheres, you're healthier, you're more successful, you're happier.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so you need to know what level you're at, so you know what level to target. Like a person who is at level 6, he needs to work on developing his interpersonal relationships. It's the next level up. He needs to get a girlfriend or a wife or a husband or whatever. But that's what he should focus
on. Gotcha.
Okay, the scale of government. Now, you hear all the time about the left and the right. That is, first of all, it's something, it's completely arbitrary. There really is no left or right. It's just a made-up thing. It's not left or right, it's up or down. The whole idea of a government is that you want to make your country or your state or whatever you're governing do better, right? You want to have a higher level. It's not about left and right. That's completely a red herring. So when you look at it this way, it actually makes sense. First of all, this is a spiral scale. Many people confuse libertarians with anarchists. Libertarians are not anarchists. A libertarian, if you remember Thomas Paine, who is really the father of the American Revolution, he famously said, I'm trying to remember the quote, government is at best a necessary evil. He was the philosophical guru for the American Revolution. So he was a libertarian. He by saying government is a necessary evil, he's saying we have to have government. You see? An anarchist doesn't want there to be any government. And I bump into people all the time who have these all mixed up. So libertarian is the best possible state, and anarchy is the lowest possible state. But there's a spiral scale. So people confuse the two. Remember, the definition of a spiral scale is there is an apparent congruence between 1 and 7, which can be very misleading and lead to catastrophic mistakes. Okay, so this is a gradual scale, meaning there's no quantum leap from level to level, it's gradual. And it's a general scale, meaning, you find where a particular government is, whether it's a municipal government, state government, federal government, whatever, you find the level and then you're done. Then you know to shoot for the next level up. Okay, now let's look at the axis here, the dotted line on the right. At the top, you have complete trust and agreement. The only people who can have a libertarian government are people who have complete trust and agreement. How many of those people are there?
0.02.
Very few, yes. That's why libertarianism, there are no libertarian governments on earth. Now, sometimes like in a religious order, you'll find some libertarianism like in an ashram, because when you have complete trust and agreement, very little control is needed. That's the style of control of a libertarian state. Very little control is needed. You can do pretty much what you want, but that only exists amongst people who have complete trust and agreement. Now let's look at the bottom. No trust or agreement. That's anarchy. In an anarchic state, there's no trust or agreement. There is no government. Any bully can come by, smash your window, come in your house and take your stuff because there's no government to prevent him. Anarchy means literally a lack of government, no government. So at anarchy, there's no attempt to control. So you see, under style of control, there's 7 styles of control. So the lowest one is not even an attempt to control, which is really apathetic. So at that point, there's no agreement and there's no trust. So in the middle between level 3 and level 4 is the dividing line, the horizontal dividing line between sane and insane. So a government that is libertarian, republic, or democracy is a sane government. A government that's at 4, 5, or 6 is an insane government. Now, the further up to the top you go, the saner you get. The lower down you go, the less sane you get. 7, anarchy is not a government at all. It's a lack of government. So that's completely insane because it's a necessary evil. I think it was Madison who said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But of course, we're not angels. So, communism controls covertly. Now, what I mean by that is they say, this is for the good of the people. This is for your own good. And that's a lie. Because there's always somebody in charge, who keeps the best food for himself, keeps the best car for himself. So it's covert. Communism is covert. Fascism is not covert. Fascism is, you do what we say or we'll kill you. See, that's not covert. It's brutal. Up from that is socialism. Now, socialism controls antipathetically. In a socialist state, there's a lot of antipathy. It's not brutal, but it's antipathetic. They haven't gotten to the point where they're going to start killing people, but there's a lot of antipathy. See, that's why it's insane, because antipathy is insane. When you come up to democracy, now democracy controls indifferently. That's sane, but it's not as good as a republic, which controls cautiously. If you study the founding fathers of America, and there are thousands and thousands of documents which tell us exactly what they thought and believed, they were very cautious. If you study the Constitutional Convention, they were their whole point was to create a government in which tyranny could not occur. That was what they were about. So they would come up with an idea and somebody would say, well, wait a minute, what if the guy does this and this? And say, oh yeah, we need to provide for that. That's why they have separation of powers, 3 branches of government and so forth. Cautious. Those are cautious people. Up from that is the libertarian. Libertarians don't need to be cautious because they're surrounded by people who need very little control. So these are 7 types of control. It tells you the best and the worst. Now, here's what you have to understand. The level of government is a reflection of the populace. A very upscale populace will have an upscale version of government. A very downscale population will have a lower version of government. You see?
Yeah.
So, and you, no matter what you do, you cannot force a higher level onto people. History has shown us this. If you have people who are a very down-tone people, they need fascism. It controls them brutally. I remember in fascist Italy, the fascists, when they would find, in Italy, everybody drinks wine. When they would find a vintner who was selling wine to young people, they would go over and beat him up and smash up his barrels and everything. That was their way of handling it. This is what you find in the mafia too. Oh, you fooled around with the boss's wife, you get a bullet in the skull. That's brutal. See? So the mafia is a fascist organization. So most people don't have a clue about any of this. But as with all the other skills, I absolutely know that this is correct. It's a hierarchy. So if you have a fascistic state and it improves, you'll get a socialist state. If you have a socialist state and it improves, you get a democracy. If a democracy improves, you get a republic. You see, the difference between a republic and a democracy is, in a republic, you have people like the American founding fathers who were statesmen, who could be trusted, like Thomas Jefferson. He could be trusted, okay? Franklin, he could be trusted. And so you sort of let them just do it, you see, because they control cautiously. When you get down to democracy, you can't, the trust is down to a point where you can't really have people in charge because the populace has deteriorated. And so in the democracy, they don't control cautiously, they control indifferently. It's sloppy, it's messy. You know, when the Constitution was complete, Franklin came out and a woman said, "Mr. Franklin, what kind of a government do we have?" And he famously said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." So you see, he obviously had this idea that they were setting up a government at level 2, and there was a lot of doubt in his mind that it could be kept. And he was prescient because America deteriorated down the scale. And there's one paragraph in this chapter in which I go through the entire history of the United States, which started out as a libertarian government with the Articles of Confederation, and show how it deteriorated down to the level at which it now exists.
Mm-hmm.
One paragraph. Because once you know what the phenomena are, it's not hard to express them. It's not hard to see them. Most people just don't have a clue about this. So they're all mixed up with left and right, which doesn't tell you anything.
Right. Right. I was just gonna say, people that, mostly today that claim that they're on the right or the left, it's not even what it's supposed to be. Like you can clearly see that they're not exactly sane,
That's right. That's right. And you look at somebody like, Ronald Reagan, when he was reelected in 1984, that was the greatest landslide in American history. He won 49 states. The only state he lost was the state of his opponent. And it is a well-known fact that he was popular with everybody. He was popular with Republicans, with Democrats, with Libertarians, with independents. That's how he was able to win 49 states. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So the term Reagan Democrat had to be invented because of all these Democrats who voted for him. Because he was not partisan. He was just trying to help the country. So that's why he was so popular.
Makes sense.
Yeah, now you have a president who is despised by almost everybody. 80% of Americans do not approve of the Biden economy. That's stunning. Even most Democrats don't want the man to run for re-election. So obviously the United States has fallen down quite a distance.
Yes.
Like for example, when Nixon ran against Kennedy in 1960, that election was very close. And it really would not have made much difference to the country who won. They were very similar in a lot of ways. Compared to today, they were both more or less centrists. And frankly, if JFK were here today, he'd be a Republican. That's why there wasn't that much difference between the two. Now, the difference between the two is so vast that a significant number of people on one side want to murder a significant number of people on the other side, and it goes for both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any questions?
No, that one's pretty self-explanatory right there, without a doubt.
Okay.
But I was just going to say, I mean, you could just really, tie that back into another scale of how do you have, an emotional reaction to anybody you don't know. Like that's goes to insane.
Yeah, that's right. It's insane. Okay, the scale of civilization. This is really a completely new concept. This tells you how civilizations develop. Now, when I say civilization, I don't mean society, because remember, there are civilized societies, barbaric societies, and primitive societies. Okay, so the barbaric and the primitive are not considered in this scale. So this is a linear scale, meaning there's no apparent overlap between level 1 and 7. Gradual, which means there's intervening stages, and general, which means once you spot a particular civilization, you're done. Anybody who's read Oswald Spengler, who wrote a very famous book about empires, which is a type of civilization, that's sort of on the same level of abstraction as the scale. So what are we measuring here on these 7 levels? The dotted line on the right, which is vertical. At the top, you have spirituality and conceptualism. That's what you get from philosophers, spirituality and conceptualism. And at the bottom, you have solidity and materialism. See, those are the opposites. Solidity is the antithesis of spirituality, and materialism is the antithesis of conceptualism. So as a civilization develops, it starts at 1, and then it goes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And all of these 7 levels are present in all civilizations. Now, of course, you can have a society that's not a civilization. Frankly, I don't think there is such a thing as Earth civilization. Earth is not a civilized place. Just go around and look at what's going on, and you can see it's not civilized. Now, there are aspects of civilization which appear, and there are particular groups, like, for example, the Essene sect in Israel was kind of its own little civilization. You see, you could call them a cult, but they were very civilized people. I had the benefit of studying with the Society of Jesus. These people don't even own their own clothes. They have no worldly possessions. They have, you could call it a cult, although most people don't. They all live together. They have no families. They have no money. They are very civilized people. And all of these functions exist in the Society of Jesus. I spent 4 years with those men. I know what I'm talking about. And I'm paying them a high compliment when I say they are extremely civilized people. So now let's see how this develops. A civilization begins with philosophy. Before philosophy exists in a certain area, you cannot have civilization. You have barbarism. So, for example, what we call the Western tradition goes back 2,500 years. Now it's actually a little more than 2,500 to people like Socrates. Now, there's such a word as pre-Socratic and post-Socratic. That is how important Socrates was. And he wrote down nothing. Everything we know about him comes from Plato, his student, who did write things down. So the beginning of Western civilization was Greek philosophy. And there are all these brilliant philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and so forth. These were men of reason. And if you study them, which I have, you can see they were able to reason. It wasn't about belief or morals, it was about reasoning. They would reason things out. That's what philosophers do. They use the skill of reason to make sense of the phenomena they experience. Now, once you have a philosophy, it becomes possible to have religion, because what happens is the philosophy becomes ensconced in a religion. Religion is about belief. See, belief and reason are two very different things. In religion, it's not about reason, it's about belief. Either you believe in it or you don't. That's what religion is about. Now, the word philosophy means literally the love of wisdom. So you see, wisdom, reason. Whereas religion comes from the Latin verb religare, which means to bind back. In religion, it's not about the love of wisdom. It's a binding. It's a belief. There's a dogma there. And some people believe in a certain religion, and other people believe in a different religion. Some people don't believe in any religion. But the religion comes after philosophy. Now, once you have a religion, the next thing that happens is law, because the law comes from the religion. This is very clear in studying the Old Testament, where the Jews had law that came out of their beliefs. Law is the same thing as morals. Law and morals are the same thing. A moral code is essentially a type of a legal code. Now, in our society, we distinguish between the two, but in essence, law and morals are the same level of abstraction. Now, once you have law, then you can have social sciences, which is what culture is about. When you study social sciences, you're studying culture. So culture is the way people do things. And that is what we study in the social sciences. So until you have law, you cannot have social sciences. You have no standard against which to see if it's a culture or not. So a culture always has laws, necessarily. Then after that, you get the arts. Arts can develop because you have a culture. Arts are about aesthetics. So you start to see pottery or sculpture or painting, okay? That comes after a culture is established at level 4, and then the next thing is you get aesthetics. Then below that, you have crafts. Now, crafts means technology. Being a shoemaker, being a pottery maker, being an architect. These are crafts. And this develops after the arts. So craft is a lower level of abstraction from art. So we'll look at a craft and we'll say, well, see, that's not art. Art is something sublime. You see? Mm-hmm. So you have a guy who's a plumber. There's nothing aesthetic in that. He has a craft. He has a technology. He knows all there is to know about plumbing. Okay? So that's his craft. That's not artistic. That's below artistic. And then the final level 7 is business, which is commerce. So after you have technology, then you can have business and you have an economy. So that is how civilizations develop. Now, civilizations that are dominant at the top are healthy civilizations, and civilizations that are dominant at the bottom are not healthy civilizations. So when you see crass materialism is the main emphasis of a civilization, you're at the bottom of the scale. How many people in America are philosophers, study philosophers, love philosophy? Very, very few. What are they interested in? Business. I got to make money so I can make the house payment, make a car payment. You know, commerce. That's commerce. So who has all the money? People in commerce, the bankers, people in business, real estate agents. They make all the money. So you'll have, let's say you have a guy who's a mason, right? He has a skill. I don't know if you've ever watched a mason. It's very impressive to watch a mason work. They have a whole technology that if you never saw them do it, you wouldn't even imagine how they can make that wall exactly at the right level and the right angle and everything else. Okay. Do masons make a lot of money? Not compared to stockbrokers, they don't. See, stockbrokers at level 7. He's involved in commerce. So those are the 7 ineluctable components of a civilization. So if you study primitives, let's say Native Americans prior to the 19th century, did they have a civilization? Not really. They were primitives. I'm not saying they had no religion. I'm not saying they had no law, but they did not have this sequence of events that culminated in a civilization. And I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. I mean, a lot of people went to the South Sea Islands where they were primitives and loved it. That's what Mutiny on the Bounty is about. The English men from the Bounty went aboard and they thought it was great. They had coconuts, they had beautiful women. You know, what more do we need? So that was an example of civilized people coming into contact with a primitive society that they preferred. So I'm not saying science, I'm not saying civilization is good or bad. I'm saying this is how it is, this is how it develops, and these are its components.
Well, the more you get into this, the more you can see how it's all intertwined.
Yes. And that's because it's naturally occurring phenomena.
Right. Yep. Where you find one, you'll find another. It's like you said the other day, right? With the the different scales where you find one thing on a scale, a lot of the other scales start to, and levels of somebody or a culture here that our civilization that we're on right now floats around the same areas or the same levels.
Okay. Okay, the scale of survival. This is absolutely vital for everybody. The main reason that people have difficulty succeeding is because they don't know this scale. I use the scale continuously, day and night, on everything. So when I mean survival as a gradient. I don't mean that you're struggling for food and water. Survival could be at a low level or a high level. So this is a spiral scale, meaning there is an apparent congruence between levels 1 and 7, which is misleading and can cause a catastrophic error if you mix them up. Because look, 7 not surviving is very much like no need to survive. See, when a person is retired, you could say he's not surviving in that specific context anymore. Let's say you have a guy, he's selling insurance for 30 years, right? He retires. He's not selling insurance anymore. He's not surviving as an insurance agent. I mean, he's surviving as a retired person, but You see, this is a specific scale. So again, there's a quantum leap, and that makes this extremely beneficial. I can feel the instant when I go from one level to another. It's just like that. And then I know, okay, I got to handle this differently. So until people know this, the human race will be what it has been, which is a concatenation of disasters. Now, this is a specific scale. Remember, how are you surviving in your family? How are you surviving in your daytime job? How are you surviving as an athlete? You see, it's specific. It has no general meaning. It has to have a context. So a person starts off not surviving, which meaning he's not established. So you have a guy, right? He doesn't have a job, doesn't have a profession. He's not established. So then he says, well, I'm going to become, let's say, I'm going to work in a bank teller, right? And he comes up to level 6. Now, what most people don't realize is this guy is in a state of peril. He hasn't succeeded at anything yet. He walks in the door. They say, they teach him how to do this, do that, So if you look at this from the top, it would be collapsing as you go down. Go looking at it from the bottom, you're in peril. And I'll give you an example. The biggest problem, the most dangerous thing about riding a horse is mounting the horse. Did you ever notice as soon as you try to mount a horse, he starts to move? So that's level 6. See, when you're at level 7, you're not on the horse. You're not a horseback rider. You decide you want to ride this horse, you have to mount him. You're at level 6. You're in peril. Now, once you get on his back, you're at 5. So better than collapsing is losing ground, meaning you're succumbing. Succumbing is better than peril. This is like the business, they're losing money, but they're not in danger of going bankrupt. You go up from that and you get to breaking even. That's what stability is. The company's breaking even. Okay? They're not getting ahead, they're not going back. They're just getting by. And above that is gaining ground, which is what success is. When you're gaining ground, you're succeeding. This would be like a company that's opening more franchises, hiring more people, right? They're gaining ground. And up from that is survival secured. This is when you are a complete success. You're at the pinnacle of success. So that's when you have security. And it goes back to that famous line from John Lennon, who said, "We had a license to kill." Meaning they could go into the studio and do anything they wanted. They had security. Something that rarely happens in the pop music. Then above that is when you retire. There's no need to survive. Right? The guy's got $1 million in the bank, he retires. So let's look at it the other way. Let's look at it from the top. So you have a guy who has no need to survive. And then there's a real estate crash. He loses all his stock. He has to go to work. So then he would try to go down to survival security. You see, he needs security because he lost his security. So he will do something to get money coming in. Now, if it doesn't go well, he goes down to where he doesn't have security anymore. He has success, but he's not secure. And if it deteriorates, he goes down to breaking even. They're not making money now, they're just breaking even. So then, if it gets worse than that, he's losing money. He's losing money, meaning they're succumbing. And if it gets worse than that, collapsing, it's time to declare bankruptcy. They're in peril. They're in peril of going out of business. And if they do declare bankruptcy and go out of business, they're at level 7. So remember Blockbuster? Company Blockbuster, right? They were at level 2. they survival secured. They had billions of dollars. They had a huge company. Everybody knew who they were, and they just went down. Eventually, they declared bankruptcy, and they're no longer in business. They were literally put out of business by Netflix and other things like that, where they became obsolete and they went right down the scale. So this tells you what to expect when you're surviving and when you're not surviving. So let me give you another context. Are you aware that the scores of American students in public schools have been steadily deteriorating now for 60 years? Right? This is not an opinion, it's a fact.
Right.
They're losing ground. Now, they are at a point now where they're starting to get into collapse, where people are just homeschooling their children. They don't want their kids in the schools, right? So it's looking to me like the public school system sometime soon is just going to collapse. There won't be enough money to pay for it. There won't be enough people who want to go there. It'll just collapse, which is what happened to Rome. You know, people thought Rome would go on forever. Well, it went down this scale, and eventually it collapsed. And we went into the Dark Ages where Rome was not surviving. It was not established. It was disestablished. There was no Roman Empire. Any questions?
No, it seems pretty self-explanatory. I'm sure.
And they have to realize this applies to, let's say you have a guy who has a hot dog stand.
Mhm.
Okay? All of this applies to him perfectly. And you compare it to, let's say, Walmart, okay? One of the biggest companies in the world. All of this applies perfectly to Walmart. This scale of survival applies to all entities trying to survive.
So
now, the reason it's a group scale is that it's virtually impossible to survive alone. Let's say you have a hermit living in the woods. He's got to get clothes from somewhere. Even if he wants to spin his own cloth, he doesn't have cotton. He's got to get the cotton. And let's say he has a dog, right, to help him keep the wolves away. You see? So there really is no individual survival in any meaningful sense that we would recognize. I mean, look, everybody came from parents. That's a group. And when a person is isolated, he does not survive well. A person survives when he gets more people on his team. You know, Sears Roebuck started out with one guy selling watches just in his spare time. And then he got a partner, and then it became one of the biggest companies in the world eventually. They went right up the scale.
yeah, makes sense. So let's just bring it back to the hot dog guy. Before he even started the hot dog stand, he was not surviving, not established.
That's right.
He's like, okay, so I got my little stand, I got hot dogs. Now he's collapsing. And then
Well, he's in peril. I don't know, collapsing is the right word. Collapsing is more what you get from when you go from the top down. But he's in great peril. He's in danger of collapsing. I mean, he's not established. He doesn't have customers. See? He doesn't have any money in the bank.
right. So
now, if he persists and he succeeds, he'll go up to where he's losing ground. He's not making a profit, but he's not in danger of going out of business. Now, if he persists, he'll go up to breaking even, where now it's costing him the same amount that he's getting in. So he has stability. And if he continues, he'll be successful, meaning he's gaining ground. He's getting more customers. He's making putting some money in the bank, see? And then if he persists, survival secure. He becomes like Nathan's hot dogs. You know, Nathan's in Coney Island?
Mm-hmm.
Nathan started out as one hot dog stand in Coney Island and then became a huge franchise. So their survival is secured.
Makes sense.
And then Nathan, I guess must have been a guy called Nathan, eventually retired. You know, looking at level one, you can think of Elvis Presley. Elvis had survival secured. He was the most famous entertainer in the world. He was the richest entertainer in the world. He was the most beloved entertainer in the world. But he never really retired. He never really said, okay, I'm done with this and go on to something else. And so eventually it got to him. So you have to be willing to say, okay, been there, done that, retire, do something else.
Hmm.
You have to be able to move on.
Hmm.
And many people do, like Andrew Carnegie, you know, he sold his business, making him the richest man in the world, you know, and he became a philanthropist. He set up all kinds of Carnegie Endowment and all kinds of museums and things like that. You know, he retired. So that's what's supposed to happen.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Scale of management. Okay. Now, earlier we talked about the scale of human ability, which is an individual scale. This is the scale of management, which is the group version of that scale. Now, the scale of management tells you that there are 7 levels of management, and you must have all 7. If any of these 7 is missing, you will necessarily fail.
Really?
So this is a spiral scale, meaning there is an apparent congruence between level 1 and level 7. When you establish a business, it has a lot of the same features as marketing the business or exporting the business. So you have to be careful not to mix those two up. Now, it's a quantum scale, meaning there's no intervening stage. They're distinct levels. And it's specific. So you could have one scale of management for your hot dog stand and another one for your podcast business, you know? And each of those has to be assessed separately according to this scale. There's no general meaning of this. It has no meaning at all in a general sense. It's like trying to divide something by 0. It just doesn't make any sense. So it starts out, you establish something. You create a business. Then once you create the business, you have to interact with somebody. Interaction is another way of saying communication. So you have to communicate. So you say, yeah, I'm here, and I'm setting up this hot dog stand. So you have to interact, all right, with people, or you're not established. Now, once you're communicating with people, then you can try to promote. So you see, communication is above promotion. Promotion is where sales occur. Say, yeah, come and buy hot dogs from me, and you sell people hot dogs. Now, the next thing is finance. Why is finance next? Because as a result of your sales, you have money. Right? People bought all these hot dogs from you. You've got $200. So you have to set up books. You have to do accounting. That's your finance section. You have to do that. You have to manage your money. Now, once you manage your money, then the next thing is production. Now, realize the difference between production and promotion, because it's very easy to confuse this. Production is You're just producing the thing. Let's say you have a guy who is a shoemaker, right? The old-fashioned shoemaker that existed for hundreds or thousands of years, right? The guy knows how to make shoes, and he's just there making shoes, making shoes, making shoes. He's manufacturing shoes. So when you get to the point of you're manufacturing something, see, you passed the finance. You're manufacturing it now. You're in production. Then the next thing after production is refinement, which is another way of saying correction. You have to have somebody there to say, okay, we need to improve this. We have this flaw, okay? And this is where your expert comes in and he tells you how to refine whatever it is you're producing. So when Henry Ford came up with the production line, that was a refinement. Instead of making cars one at a time, which is what had been prevailed previously, he came up with the idea of you get a big building, you put a moving belt in it, and you move the car, and it goes from this station to this station. And you see, he refined it. That's how he became a billionaire. He corrected things that were not right. See, making cars one by one, that wasn't the correct way to do it. The correct way to do it was by a production line, and then everybody did that. And then after that, you have marketing, which is what your PR department does, and that's exporting. Marketing is just getting it out there. Okay, we've got these cars, now we have to market them, which is another way of saying we have to export them. So you have the Ford dealership. Okay, so you've got the production line, you've got the experts making sure everything's done right at level 6, and then you send these cars out. You have these car trailers that take a dozen cars at a time to the dealership, and that's level 7. So you want to buy a car, you say, oh, I'm going to go to the Ford dealership. So you're going into that level 7. But behind that was level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And they all have to be there.
Mm.
And let me give you an example. Interaction. Interaction is like your telephones, your email. If your email goes out, that's a catastrophe, right? If your internet service provider stops working, you can't text people, you can't get your email. See, that's a failure at level 2. That is a very serious problem. You have a communication problem. You can't talk to anybody. You can't talk to your customers. You can't talk to other people in the business. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So that's at level 2. That's really, so you see, you can't have level 7 until you have level 6. You can't have level 6 until you have level 5. You can't have level 5 until you have level 4. So this goes in a certain way.
Hmm.
So when you have a startup, what's a startup? A startup is, okay, we're going to establish this business, right? Then you start interacting with people about it. Then you promote it. You tell people why this is good, how you can have sales, right? Then you've got to have finance to set it up. Okay, so we get an angel. He gives us $10 million. Okay, now we start producing whatever this thing is. Let's say it's cell phones, right? Then you have somebody come in to refine it. You have experts who can correct things that are wrong. Correct not only the product, but the way you make the product. And once that's done, it's just marketing. You take out advertisements, you ship them out to stores, and now you're in business.
Wow.
Now, let's look at human ability level. We talked about the scale of human ability. So notice that the levels run backwards. Instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it goes 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And it's out of sync, it's out of kilter, where 1 is at the top. Now, let me tell you what this means. What do you do when you have a genius? You create a business around him. That's what you do with a genius. Perfect example, Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page was a musical genius. He created Led Zeppelin. He found these other three guys, and because of his genius, he found the right ones. He created Led Zeppelin, and he had a manager right there to help him with it. See, that's what you do with a genius. You can't get a genius and make him produce. He won't want to do that. It's not going to work. Okay, so now let's look at level 7, ignoramus. What do you do with an ignoramus? You interact with him. He doesn't know anything. You can't really sell him anything because he doesn't know what you do. So all you can do is communicate with him. Then we go to 6, the layman. The layman is the person who you can promote to because he's a layman. He knows what you do, and so you can promote to him. Then, because you can promote to him, you're going to have sales, and you're going to have finance because the finance comes from the sales. You see, you've got money now. Well, your amateur is your best customer. That's where you're going to get most of your money from the amateur. Now, beyond that, you get into production. What do you do with a professional? You make him produce. So you get some guy, let's say he's a professional trombonist. What do? You put him in a band and you have him play trombone. See, he's a professional. So he's producing. If he were an amateur, he wouldn't be able to really produce because he's only an amateur. So then the next thing is expert. What do you do with an expert? The expert is the guy who refines your product. He knows all about it. He corrects it. And then the virtuoso. What do you do with a virtuoso? You market him. You don't build an organization around him because he's not a genius. He's a virtuoso. So that's how the human scale of human ability dovetails with the scale of management. Now, I realize this is very quick and very confusing, but if you study the two and go back and forth, you'll see that they dovetail perfectly, exactly as I just said. And this tells you when you manage a business, how to handle your personnel.
Wow.
You see, let's say you're a band leader, right? You bump into a guy, he's a musician. Well, is he a professional or is he an amateur? If he's a professional, hire him. If he's an amateur, you don't want him and he's only an amateur. You see, this tells you what people to put where to construct your organization. If you've got a guy who's an expert, you don't want him simply playing his trombone. He could be the band leader and tell everybody else how to play. You see, because he's an expert. And when you have a virtuoso, the only thing you can do with a virtuoso is marketing. You don't have to do anything else. So you get Eddie Van Halen and you just get 3 guys. Better example is Jimi Hendrix. He was a virtuoso. They found a bassist and a drummer, and the rest is history. They marketed him. See, they just, he was discovered by people who said, this guy is great, and we have to market him. So they got Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding to back him up, and the rest is history.
Wow. You know, most people, look at they don't know how to build a business plan or any of that. You can just read this chapter and figure it out from there.
That's right.
Wow.
It's like the skeleton of a business.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be a business. It could be an army. It could be a government. Anything that you can manage.
Wow. Yeah, that's like what am I on a scale of just shocked?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Next. Okay, the scale of exchange. Okay, so this completely undercuts economics. Economics is a very complicated subject. They rarely even mention exchange. This is extremely important in understanding what goes on in an economy. This is a spiral scale, meaning it's very easy to confuse level 1 with level 7. So, level 1 is exchange by honor. All you need is somebody's word. You give a guy pizza, he says, well, I'll come by tomorrow and give you $15. Okay, it's an honor. That's the highest level of exchange. Now, if the guy's a crook, it's level 7. He steals your pizza, he never comes back. So you see how it's very easy to mix up these two. You have to be able to distinguish. Is this person going to take it, or is he an honorable person? And that's the spiral scale. Now, gradual. There's no gradation between these two. These are completely different levels. Either you're at 2 or you're at 1. And general, meaning this is not context driven. This is a very broad understanding. So let's look on the right, the dotted vertical line. At the top of this, you have complete trust, and the bottom, you have no trust. Well, if a person is taking your things, you have no trust in him, right? Whereas if a person is honorable, you have complete trust. So this is a gradation of trust. So the corresponding mode of exchange goes with how trustworthy the person is. You know the old joke, would you buy a used car from this person? Did you ever hear that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that tells you what this is about. So for example, if a person is untrustworthy, you shouldn't give him credit because he's untrustworthy. You have to have somebody who's very trustworthy to deserve credit. So this saves you from a lot of problems and mistakes. So there is a mode of transfer. Now let's start at level 7, taking. Now most people are going to say taking. How is taking a mode of exchange? Taking is in fact the mode of exchange most commonly in use on Earth globally and throughout history. So a guy comes up to you, pulls a gun on you, says, give me your watch and your wallet, right? He's taking them. He's using force or deceit. Now, deceit is like the con man. He's taking your stuff by deceit. So how is this exchange? Well, let me tell you this. The mafia comes around, right? They run a protection racket. They say, if you have any trouble, we'll protect you. You give us $100 a week. And the guy says, well, what happens if I don't give you the $100? They say, we blow up your store. So the exchange is you pay $100 and you get to stay in business, keep having your store, and not go to the hospital. So you see, it's a very, very brutal, low level of exchange. The government does exactly the same thing. You will pay your taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, we will put you in prison. They are taking your money. Now, it's an exchange. You want to stay out of jail? Pay your taxes. That's the exchange. Now, remember I said many times, people have trouble understanding the extremes of these scales. This doesn't make too much sense, but there's all kinds of examples of it. So let's say somebody blackmails you, right? They have pictures of you with some woman who you're cheating on your wife with, right? They say, look, you give us $1,000 and we'll give you these negatives, right? So they're taking your money. So what's the exchange? Well, you get to get rid of these negatives and they get the $1,000. See, that's a very brutal, low level of exchange. This is when you're dealing with people who can't be trusted. Now, it's often said you should never pay blackmail because they'll just come back again. Maybe they have copies of these negatives. You see? Okay, so up from that is barter. Well, everybody knows where this is. You give me a quart of milk and I give you a dozen eggs. Object for object. That's better than 7. Like in the caveman days, a guy sees your pretty wife, he hits you over the head with a club, and he takes your wife. Barter is better than that. I'll give you 2 horses for your wife. Okay. And that's exactly what went on with the Native Americans. You know, the brave wants to marry the daughter of the chief. He says, I'll give you 3 horses and you give me your daughter. He says, okay, that's barter. Up from that is substitute. Now, a substitute is a convenient medium. So, for example, you know, in America, we have the term the buck or a buck. You know, you give somebody $1, say, give me a buck. You give them $1, right? Why is it called a buck? Because on the American frontier, a buck was an adult male deer. So you would kill the deer, you would skin it, and then you would trade the skin as a medium of exchange. So trapping was a convenient medium. Like, for example, the American West was originally settled by trappers. They would go into the Rocky Mountains, they would get all these beaver pelts, and it was a medium of exchange. Okay, it's a convenient medium. In China, pardon me, in Japan, it might be true in China, but I know in Japan, bushels of rice was the medium of exchange. How much is it for this house? I want to buy your house. 200 bushels of rice. That's how they did it. See, it's not really barter, it's a convenient medium of exchange. Then you go above that to coin. Well, coin is a standard valuable. So originally, coin, you would have some gold. Gold was valuable. So you give a guy this piece of gold, and he gives you the thing you want. So this is similar to 5, only it's more sophisticated. You make coins out of silver or gold or platinum or whatever. Okay? So there's a standard valuable. Then above that is cash. Well, cash is an abstraction. So for many years, it was considered laughable that you would exchange a diamond for pieces of paper, which is what cash is. See, if you're going to give somebody gold bullion, that's a type of coin. But if you're going to write somebody a check for $50,000, that's an abstraction. See, that's much more sophisticated. Then above that, you get credit. Credit is one's record. That's the medium of exchange. So, you know, when you use your debit card or your credit card in a store, there's a record that goes with that. And we've got it down now into computers where the computer checks your record in a millisecond, says, yes, this guy has plenty of money, and they subtract that from your account. It affects your record, and so you buy on credit. Now, the problem with credit is, you notice how much cheating there is on the internet, how many people have been, scammed on the internet, right? Because it's a credit economy. Everything is done by, so, you know, I've been scammed by people, crooked people on the internet. So credit is only for people who have complete trust. See, if you deal with some guy from Nigeria who's running a scam, you have no way to find him. And if he makes you trust him, he can fleece you. So again, see how it corresponds to trust. And at the top, you have honor. So you go to somebody and say, Joe, look, I want to buy this car. Can you give me 5,000? I'll give it back to you tomorrow. Say, okay, he gives you $5,000. You go buy the car. The next day, you give him back his $5,000. That's all on your word. That's where you have the highest trust. So I don't know about you, but I've many times been in situations where, because of my reputation, people would loan me things. I could go to somebody and say, you know, look, give me $1,000. I'll have it for you next week. Okay, no paper, nothing. Because I was a trustworthy person. The next week I gave them their money back. That's the honor system. So that's all about exchange. Now, the real problem comes in where you have crooked people who are exchanging at high levels, as I just said, like with scams. I don't know about you, but I've had many times where people scammed my bank. They somehow, I don't know how they did it, but I had all these things on my account, shows up in my bank account. I never heard of these things, right? So you go to the bank, you report fraud, they cancel your card. So it stops it right then, and then they give you the money. So that's how exchange works. And this is really much more important and valuable than most of what's discussed in economics. As you can see, for example, all of the governments of the world have grossly abused the trust placed in them. I mean, the United States is now $33 trillion in debt. Nothing like that has ever occurred before on Earth that we know of. Certainly not in the last 6,000 years of which we have history. That is because you have criminals in the government. They should not be entrusted with all that money. You entrust them. It's just, you know, it's just a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff in the news. I'm not going to mention it about certain people in the government running scams. And where does all this money go? These billions and billions of dollars that they tax us for. You probably heard that the Secretary of Defense, Rumsfeld, came out some years ago and said there's, I think he said $2.5 trillion missing from the Department of Defense. How does that money go missing? What happened to that money?
It doesn't go missing. It's
Yeah.
it's somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone knows where it's at.
Yeah, I actually know what happened to it. But the point is that trusting these people with the money is a complete mistake because most of them are not trustworthy. Most of them are crooks.
Mhm.
Now, if you pull that crap on the mafia, they blow your brains out. Okay? In our government, people get away with it 95% of the time, which is why the government is in deep debt. And it's not just the United States, it's all the governments in the world. So you see these guys who come into government, they're not making fortunes of money. And when they leave, they're millionaires and billionaires. How did that happen?
Yeah.
Goes on all the time. I can name names. So, you know, obviously they're not trustworthy people, and they should never have been permitted to have access to all these funds. Because the more money you put into a government, the more it attracts criminals. You know, Theodore Roosevelt told his son once, you know, sometimes people can break into a railroad car and steal the stuff, but a lawyer can steal the whole railroad.
Makes sense.
So you have people like Bernie Madoff, you know, people trust him. Well, he got caught and he went to jail. You know why he got caught and went to jail? He's not part of the government. When people are in the government and do that, they cover it up. And I could name names all day long, and I'm not going to. Questions? Okay, so now it's 6 o'clock. So we're past 2 hours. Do you think we could stop and finish this up at another day?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll email you as soon as we get done here and we'll set up a
Okay.
date.
Okay, great.
All right. All right, guys,
Okay,
tune in
Brett.
for one more and we'll see you on the next one.
Right.